Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of The Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of CareerGig and host of the Agile World podcast. Today we're going to talk about what it takes to remain agile while navigating a fast-moving industry. Paul Dunning co-founded what is now Capital Communicator in 2004, at the very beginning of the social media age, and since that time, many developments such as marketing automation, personalization, programmatic advertising, and more have changed the marketing landscape. All the while, the business of marketing, whether from the client side or the agency side, has evolved and changed many times over. How do you know where to focus and how to anticipate change when your industry is under continual disruption? To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Paul Dunning, publisher of Capital Communicator. First, Paul, welcome to the show, and why don't you tell me a little bit about Capital Communicator?
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Capital Communicator is a media and events company that I formed it's about 10 years, a little over 10 years ago now. And we cover the advertising, marketing, public relations, and media community. Our footprint is primarily the Mid-Atlantic. We have two newsletters. One serves to let people know of the various events that are happening in the region, and the other one is the latest news of the region. Our website is the primary source of getting information, which is updated on a daily basis. And then we produce a couple events a year. Historically, we've done 3 events: a Mid-Atlantic Marketing Summit, PR Summit, and Communicator Summit. This past year, it was a year of the pandemic and so forth. We had combined those conferences into one conference called MAG Summit, MAG standing for Marketing, Advertising, Communications. And we're monitoring 2021 to see when it's safe for us to gather again. Our preference is to do live conferences. We went virtual this last year, but we community and networking is a big part of our model.
Great. Well, yeah, and I definitely want to get into the most recent changes and how you're adapting and stuff like that in a little bit. And I mean, for what it's worth, Paul and I go I would say way back. I've been a Capital Communicator sponsor when I had my agency and stuff like that. So have had some great experiences there. But let's go back to the beginning and your experience of starting it. So where were you? It was originally called DC Communicator. Where were you when that was happening? And, did you anticipate what it would end up becoming?
Not at all. Greg, DC Communicator was a little project started as a way for me to get back to a community that had been highly fragmented from the tech bubble bust. Back in the late 90s and early 2000, I had played a lead role in a multimedia holding company that was part of that tech wave. After the crash, there was little to no coverage on a regional level on what was happening in the marketing communications profession. And on a national level, only the larger holding company firms made the news. The action at the time was coming from a plethora of startups that was created after the tech bust. So Phil Rabin, my former business partner, and I started the monthly newsletter, DC Communicator, with the intent to recognize emerging companies provide connections for jobs, and to again bring back a community that had been fragmented from the bubble burst. So actually, Capital Communicator was formed in 2008. In early 2009, I decided to focus on Capital Communicator full time.
Great, great. So, I've been a part of the marketing industry for quite a while. A little less so these days, but with my agency starting in 2003 and on, and you've certainly been involved in this pretty fast changing industry and seen a lot of things, grow and change and all that. How what's guided your thinking as you've kept your publication relevant, you've grown your audience, all this within this industry, and how do you plan to keep what's the mindset you need to keep evolving and staying up with what's current?
Well, over the number of years prior to Capital Communicator in my professional life, I was fortunate to have a lot of different experiences working in many aspects of advertising, marketing, and public relations. They included roles in production and creative, sales, management, and then and mergers and acquisitions. I was very involved in a consolidation strategy of marketing and advertising communications companies back during that tech period. And this was at the time, that the 360-degree marketing model and the best of breed components in a holding company was very much the model of the time. Um, so early on, I've seen marketing communications as being a community of expertise and not just one channel. Um, and the media landscape has historically been pretty siloed into channels such as advertising, marketing, public relations. I mean, you take a look at what existed back before Capital Communicator, and even certainly to this day, it's been pretty siloed. So the intent was to bring these communities together, and that is what I've strived to do from the very beginning. Um, Even though the industry is still very siloed, we're seeing the convergence of these disciplines happen, and that's what's driven me to stay abreast of what is going on in these different areas, but from a converged point of view.
Yeah.
So, we'll continue to evolve with that in mind as the art and science of influence forever changes to adapt to this changing world.
Yeah. Well, and to continue that, I mean, so in addition to keeping up with the convergence, the marketing industry in general, you also function as a publisher, and publishing is certainly one of those things that, along the same time frame, has gone through a number of changes and things as well. So, having started back in 2004, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of different things going on. Social media is certainly one of those things that, back at that time, I mean, I think, Friendster definitely existed. MySpace and Facebook were, twinkles in somebody's eye, basically. But, how do you see the role of the publisher, especially now that we have a few years under our belt as with social being, ubiquitous, let's say. How do you see the role of the publisher in a world where everyone is a content creator, whether that's TikTok videos or blogs or what have you?
That's a very good question, Greg, and it's ongoing question that I certainly ask myself and ask of the editors and so forth that I work with. I think the role of the publisher is to have, the seasoned editors and hopefully the next generation of editors that have a sense on how to curate legitimate content to best suit the needs of the readers, but also to keep it fresh. It's a very challenging business because there are not a lot of content creators whose sole goal is to. I mean, I should say there. Most of the content creators, their sole goal is to maximize clicks,
Yeah.
often sacrificing quality and legitimacy of the content. Um, Native advertising has been a very important part of our revenue model. And we believe that most effective native advertising programs come from by giving and sharing knowledge consistently over time. So this is how we've tried to lead and influence the content creators that we curate and that are sponsors. So we're not into that one-off clickbait style native ad. Candidly, because I don't tend to accept that.
Right, right.
Probably a lot of money that I've left on the table without question. Greg, I get solicitations probably on average of twice a week from companies that are, primarily, hey, we read we come to your site, your perfect stuff, we write really good content, and it's just so very clear, what they're doing. I mean, there's a lot of businesses that start up that way, but we have a wise community, and we've got to be true to our community, and we'd like to know our community really well who's publishing it. So we tend to like to know a lot about the source and trust the source of the content that's created before we certainly publish. And
Mm.
so we make it very clear that we have editorial control over what we publish.
Yeah, and I think I mean, to me, that's my experience of your community, and is there's loyalty because there's trust, right? So it's not, there's you mentioned the alternative to that is just, yeah, let's get a lot of content, and either there's something for everybody, or there's just enough that there's enough ad revenue to kind of sustain it. But I mean, do you see that as a way? How have you built loyalty? I guess. I mean, is that I don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, but to me that seems like a way to build loyalty. But is that how you look at it as well?
Uh, Absolutely. And, one of the things that we did from the very beginning with trying to build loyalty is to reach out and truly try and make it clear that we're partnering with the community. Um, First of all, as I noted earlier, from the beginning, we wanted to provide a voice for all channels of marketing communications. So, uh, a way in which we did that early on is that we reached out and partnered with the various association groups that um, are communities for advertising, marketing, public relations, creative and design, and all those. And and said, look to us as being your primary, your media partner, and what we want to do is we want to be supportive of uh, of what you're doing with bringing together. I use the term your tribe,
Yeah.
your community. You provide with events, networking, and so forth that you're doing. But look to us as being the kind of the place where everybody can kind of come and get a sense of the full picture of marketing communications. So that's what um, from the beginning and to this day, we've tried to work very very closely with the different groups, and fortunately, I feel like that has built a lot of loyalty in the community, and yeah, we've had very good feedback from the different association groups about that partnership, and it's one that they've depended upon, and vice versa. It's important to us as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, another thing you do is you mentioned this at the beginning of the interview. You do events, and certainly, I think that's another. In person events have always been, whether it's networking, whether it's more content based events. I mean, that's always been a way to build personal connections and things like that as well. But obviously, with the pandemic, that has completely changed the entire events landscape, and we're all sitting in Zoom meetings and working remotely and so on and so forth. So I know you early on you have some annual events that you've done, and you mentioned you consolidated and stuff like that. What did you learn from that process of of doing your first virtual events, and what might you do either the same or differently with your next ones?
Well, first of all, Greg, I tell you, it was a lot more work than I anticipated. Doing a virtual event, I mean, every aspect you think of event that's you try and do live, you're converting over into a digital form, and it truly is quite different. And having the right team and the right platform is so critical to its success. Um,
Yeah,
I'd say the toughest challenge of a virtual event that is so important to certainly the types of events that we do is trying to replace the face-to-face networking. I mean, and
yeah,
also the exhibit experience. That's always been a big component of what we do, and it's the technology, in my personal view, is not there yet. Not to say that it won't be in the future, but personally, it's I think that certainly on the exhibit side, trying to engage the exhibitors, um, with the community, I found a challenge where do things differently for virtual events in the future is they would become much more involved in the programming throughout, and uh, exhibiting would be different. I mean,
yeah,
so that is definitely something that I know a lot of companies are working, striving to improve upon that, just like with the networking. So,
yeah,
and then I think what's happened, because was thrown into this last year with only being able to network and communicate through technology, and the Zoom factor. Yes, there's no question about it. There is Zoom fatigue. So where I where I see the virtual event platform and that approach really working is when you have more of this destination conference event that requires travel, requires
Yeah.
certainly a significant amount of expense, and obviously time. Uh, Having a virtual component, I think, is very, very important. I think when you have more of a regional type event where networking is such a big component of it, there's no replacement for doing it live. So personally, I'm looking very forward to getting back to the live experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess along those lines, I mean, what's the? I mean, everybody asks this question, and I realize it's hard to predict too much. But what's the new? What's going to be the next normal? I guess is are we going back to some sense of normalcy at some point? I mean, obviously, there's lots of details like vaccines and all of those things to work out. But I mean, do you think we're going back to some kind of normal? The way it used to be? Is it is our virtual events here to stay? But what are your thoughts there?
Well, I do think virtual events are here to stay. Um, they're, I think, certainly with working virtually and communicating virtually makes a lot of sense in many ways for just the time savings. But I think that uh, we'll see many events become hybrids,
Yeah,
and so and um, so much technology. The technology has improved so much over this past year with the experience, and I see it continue to do so. So I don't think things will go back totally the way they were, but I certainly don't think virtual events will end up replacing the live experience. I think that live experience, live events will be around for quite some time in the future, as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, one last question before we wrap up. Having spent a lot of your focus to go back to the marketing industry, having spent a lot of your focus on watching that industry over your career, what do you think the marketing agency of 5 years from now will look like?
Uh, that's another good question.
I spend
Um,
a lot of time thinking about this, even though I don't own an agency anymore.
really
I
good.
spend a bit of time, so I ask everybody that I that I know the same question.
Absolutely. Greg, when what became Capital Communicator was first launched, we'd just come off several years of consolidation. Um, Many companies in the industry were building a broad mix of expertise under one roof, plus a few of the traditional consulting firms were building agencies within their organization. Also, having um, multiple fully staffed offices for agencies was very important. What I see is a trend that's changing, and it's really the change started over this past 10 years, especially since the financial crisis, and also because of technology. And then throw the pandemic on top of it, it's accelerated change. So I think in the next 5 years, that the majority of large marketing and communications agencies will be within professional services, consulting, and mega technology firms like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Accentures and Googles. I think the remaining marketing communications firms will be small to mid-size, with a majority of their staff working virtually and as contractors. I think only the largest organizations will tend to have the agency of record retainer type business models, and most other firms will be working on a project basis. In-house agencies will probably come and go due to partly to the challenge of retaining top talent,
Yeah, agreed.
uh, and they're changing business certainly. I think offices will become made up primarily of more of the entry level staff, with the senior level staff working primarily remotely. I think office space will resign for that entry level staff in mind and not the senior level staff. Real estate is no longer as important as it used to be, and I certainly think that we'll see a lot more people working remotely.
Mm,
The thing is talent is spread out, and we'll see firms having talent spread out throughout the country.
mm,
I think that has been accelerated so much in this past year because those models were proven that they can work.
yeah. Yeah, those are great. Those are great thoughts. I think it's and a pretty comprehensive view of the aspects. That's great. Well, Paul, always great to talk with you, and I'm glad others get to listen in this time. When us chatting. So thanks for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Well, go to capitalcommunicator.com, and we actually spell capital with an O. So it's CAPITOL communicator. If you use an A, you'll get there. But yeah, check if you're not familiar with us, definitely check it out. And if you like what you see, subscribe to the newsletters. That'll keep you up to date. It's all free, and that not only keep you up to date with what we're doing, but what others, some of the association groups and so forth, what they have and their planning and the events.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining the show, Paul Dunning, publisher of Capital Communicator. Thanks for listening to the Agile World with Greg Kilstrom. I'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.